They say I'm probably the last loyal husband in Cook County, which tells you everything you need to know about my judgment. My name is Corbin Finlor, and at 43, I've learned that being faithful in marriage is like being the only sober driver at a party. Everyone thinks you're missing the fun until the crashes start happening. The realization hit me on a Tuesday morning in October, watching my wife Ayla butter her toast with the mechanical precision of someone whose mind was elsewhere. Probably with someone else too, but I wasn't ready to admit that yet. She'd been distant for months, working late at her marketing firm, taking mysterious phone calls in the garage, and treating me like an annoying roommate who occasionally fixed the Wi-Fi. "I'll be late again tonight," she announced without looking up from her phone. "Client dinner." "Which client?" I asked, though I already knew she wouldn't give me a straight answer. "The Morrison account. You wouldn't understand the complexities." "Right. Because 20 years in IT security consulting apparently made me too simple to grasp the intricacies of selling overpriced widgets to corporations." I bit back the sarcasm and nodded like the good little husband I'd trained myself to be. Ayla grabbed her designer purse, one of many recent purchases I didn't remember approving, and headed for the door. She paused, and for a moment I thought she might actually acknowledge my existence with something resembling affection. Instead, she said, "The garbage disposal is making that noise again. Can you fix it?" And then she was gone, leaving me alone in our suburban Chicago kitchen with the morning light streaming through windows that suddenly felt like prison bars. The house, which we'd bought 5 years ago during happier times, now felt like a museum of a marriage that had quietly died while I wasn't paying attention. I should have seen the signs earlier. The new clothes, the gym membership she actually used, the way she'd started sleeping with her phone under her pillow like it contained state secrets. But I'd been busy with work, busy with life, busy being the kind of husband who assumed that loyalty was a two-way street. That afternoon, while replacing the garbage disposal, because apparently I'd become the household maintenance department, I found something that changed everything. Tucked behind the cleaning supplies under the kitchen sink was a small gym bag I'd never seen before. Inside, beneath a change of clothes and some expensive workout gear, was a burner phone. My hands shook as I powered it on. The text messages told a story that made my stomach clench like a fist. Messages to someone named T. Mallard that were explicit enough to make a sailor blush. Messages that detailed things my wife hadn't done with me in years. Messages that made it clear this wasn't a recent development. I sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by pipe wrenches and the ruins of my marriage, reading about how my wife and her lover laughed about my pathetic devotion and planned their next rendezvous. There was even a message about how easy it would be to clean out the tech nerd when the time came. The smart thing would have been to confront her immediately. The normal thing would have been to lawyer up and file for divorce. But I'd spent 2 decades in cybersecurity, which meant I'd developed a healthy paranoia about being prepared for the worst-case scenario. And something told me that Ayla's betrayal was just the tip of an iceberg that could sink me completely if I wasn't careful. So instead of confronting her, I did what I do best. I gathered intelligence. That evening, when Ayla came home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine, I greeted her with a smile and asked about her client dinner. She spun an elaborate tale about the Morrison account, while I nodded and made appropriate responses, all the while thinking about the messages I'd read. "You seem different tonight," she said, studying my face with the kind of attention she hadn't shown me in months. "Different how?" "I don't know. More present." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. If only she knew. I was more present than I'd been in years, cataloging every lie, every evasion, every tell that revealed the woman I'd married had become a stranger. But I just smiled and said, "Maybe I'm finally learning to appreciate what I have." She seemed satisfied with that answer, which told me everything about how little she knew me anymore. We went through the motions of our evening routine, her scrolling through social media while I cleaned the kitchen, both of us existing in the same space without really connecting. Later, as she slept beside me with her precious phone clutched in her hand, I stared at the ceiling and planned my next moves. I'd built a career on understanding systems, finding vulnerabilities, and protecting against threats. Now I was going to apply those same skills to protecting myself from the biggest threat I'd ever faced: my own wife. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd been securing networks against intrusion, while my own home had been compromised from the inside. But every system has weaknesses, and every attack leaves traces. Ayla might think she was clever, but she was about to learn that underestimating the tech nerd was the biggest mistake of her life. I closed my eyes and smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow, I would start building my case. And when I was done, everyone would know exactly who Ayla Finlor really was. The next morning brought the kind of crisp October weather that made suburban Chicago look like a postcard, all golden leaves and perfect lawns hiding imperfect lives. I watched Ayla drive away in her BMW, another recent purchase I was apparently funding, and then got to work. My paranoia had paid off in ways I'd never expected. 3 years ago, after a break-in attempt in our neighborhood, I'd convinced Ayla that we needed a comprehensive security system. Being in IT security, I'd naturally handled the installation myself, and being naturally suspicious, I'd gone a bit overboard. Every room in our house was monitored by cameras so small and well hidden that even I sometimes forgot they were there. The audio pickup was crystal clear, the video was high definition, and everything was stored on a server in my home office that only I knew how to access. The system was completely legal, I'd made sure of that, and technically, both our names were on the installation permits. But the access codes? Those were mine alone. I spent the morning reviewing footage from the past 6 months, fast-forwarding through the mundane moments of our marriage to find the smoking guns I knew had to be there. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The first revelation came from a recording made just 2 weeks ago. Ayla was in our living room with her best friend Lana, a gossipy woman who'd never liked me and made no effort to hide it. They were drinking wine and talking about their marriages with the casual cruelty that some women reserve for their absent husbands. "Honestly, Ayla, I don't know how you stand it," Lana was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the hidden microphones. "Corbin is so predictable. Doesn't he bore you to tears?" "You have no idea," Ayla replied, and the venom in her voice made me pause the playback. "He thinks loyalty is some kind of virtue, like being faithful makes him special or something." "Men like that never see it coming," Lana said with a laugh. "They're so busy being good that they don't notice when their wives stop caring. The funny thing is, he actually thinks I respect him for it, for being the devoted husband while I'm out there actually living my life." They'd laughed about it. Laughed about my devotion, my faithfulness, my complete failure to see what was happening right under my nose. But they'd also talked about their future plans, and that's where things got really interesting. I called my friend Soren Valden, a digital forensics specialist who'd helped me on several corporate security cases. If anyone could help me turn my surveillance footage into courtroom-ready evidence, it was Soren. "Corbin, my friend," Soren said when he arrived at my house an hour later. "You sounded stressed on the phone. What's eating you?" Soren was one of those brilliant, eccentric types who seemed to live entirely on energy drinks and conspiracy theories. He had the kind of unkempt appearance that made people underestimate him, which was exactly how he liked it. His specialty was finding digital evidence that other people thought they'd hidden or destroyed. I showed him the burner phone and played some of the audio recordings. His expression grew more serious with each revelation. "This is comprehensive," he said, scrolling through the messages on Ayla's secret phone. "She's been planning this for months. Look at this thread with T. Mallard. That's Trent Mallard, by the way. I recognize the number from a corporate investigation I did last year. He's the regional director at Hartwell Marketing. That's Ayla's company. Her boss, actually. This gets worse, Corbin. Look at these financial discussions. They're not just having an affair, they're planning to clean you out and disappear together. The messages Soren showed me painted a picture of calculated betrayal that went far beyond simple adultery. Ayla and Trent had been moving money, hiding assets, and preparing for what they called the extraction. They'd even discussed how to frame me for financial crimes if I got too close to the truth. There's more, Soren said, his fingers flying across his laptop keyboard. I'm seeing references to a lawyer, someone named Pierce Eldro. They've been planning this legal strategy for weeks. Pierce Eldro. I knew that name. He was Ayla's family lawyer, the guy who'd handled her father's estate and helped us with our house purchase. I'd always thought he was a bit slick, but he'd been friendly enough. The idea that he was part of this conspiracy made my hands clench into fists. What do you need me to do? I asked. Keep acting normal. Don't let on that you know anything. Meanwhile, I'm going to authenticate all this evidence and prepare a legal package that will make their heads spin. You've got enough here to destroy them all, but only if we do this right. That evening, I put on the performance of my life. When Ayla came home from another late meeting, I greeted her with a smile and asked about her day. She spun her usual web of lies while I nodded and played the part of the clueless husband. You know what? I said as we sat down to dinner. I've been thinking we should take a vacation, maybe somewhere tropical, just the two of us. The look of panic that flashed across her face was so brief I almost missed it. That sounds nice, she said carefully, but work is really busy right now. Maybe after the holidays? Of course, I understand. But I understood more than she realized. I understood that she was stalling for time, waiting for the right moment to execute whatever plan she and her conspirators had cooked up. I understood that every smile she gave me was a lie, every kiss was a betrayal, every "I love you" was a calculated manipulation. What she didn't understand was that the devoted husband she'd been taking advantage of was about to become her worst nightmare. After she went to bed, I spent hours in my office, going through the evidence with the methodical precision that had made me successful in my career. Every message, every recording, every piece of digital evidence was cataloged and cross-referenced. By morning, I had a timeline that showed exactly how long Ayla had been planning to destroy me. The answer was 18 months. 18 months of lies, manipulation, and calculated cruelty, all while I'd been working to support the lifestyle she was using to betray me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and watched the sunrise through my office window. In a few hours, Ayla would wake up and continue her charade, never suspecting that her loyal husband had become something much more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose and all the evidence he needed to take her down. The game was about to begin, and for the first time in months, I was actually looking forward to something. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of suburban normalcy that felt like a stage set, all surface perfection hiding the drama brewing underneath. I was in my office, reviewing the legal documents Soren had helped me prepare, when I heard voices in the kitchen. Ayla was supposed to be at work, but I recognized her laugh mixing with a deeper, more authoritative voice. I checked the security monitors and felt my stomach drop. Pierce Eldro was sitting at my kitchen table, his expensive suit and perfectly styled hair making him look like he owned the place. He was spreading papers across the surface, while Ayla hovered nearby, both of them looking far too comfortable with whatever they were planning. I saved my work, closed the laptop, and walked downstairs with the casual air of a man who had no idea his life was about to be turned upside down. "Corbin!" Ayla's voice was artificially bright, the tone she used when she wanted something. Pierce stopped by to discuss some legal matters. Pierce Eldro stood and extended his hand with the kind of practiced smile that lawyers perfect in law school. "Corbin, good to see you. I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced." "Not at all," I said, shaking his hand while mentally cataloging the papers on my table. What kind of legal matters? Well, Pierce said, settling back into his chair like he was holding court. Ayla and I have been discussing some financial planning strategies. Estate protection, asset management, that sort of thing. I noticed he didn't invite me to sit down in my own kitchen. Instead, he gestured to the papers with the air of a man delivering an ultimatum. The thing is, Corbin, there are some irregularities in your financial records that could potentially cause problems down the road. Tax issues mostly, but the kind that could escalate if not handled properly. My training in reading people told me this was a setup, but I played along. What kind of irregularities? Pierce exchanged a look with Ayla that was supposed to seem concerned, but came across as conspiratorial. Some of your consulting income appears to have been misreported. Clients paying in cash, expenses that don't quite add up. The kind of thing that could look like tax evasion if someone wanted to make an issue of it. But we can fix it, Ayla said quickly, moving to stand behind Pierce's chair in a show of solidarity that made my jaw clench. Pierce has prepared some documents that will transfer certain assets into a trust structure. For protection. I looked at the papers more carefully. They were property transfer documents, designed to move ownership of our house, my retirement accounts, and most of our liquid assets into a trust controlled by Ayla. The language was dense and technical, but the intent was clear. Sign these papers, and I'd be left with nothing. This is quite a lot to process, I said, maintaining my calm exterior while my mind raced. Can I have some time to review everything? Pierce's smile became sharper. I'm afraid the timing is rather critical, Corbin. There are certain deadlines involved, and frankly, the longer we wait, the more exposure you have to potential criminal charges. Criminal charges. There it was, the threat wrapped in legal language and delivered with professional courtesy. Sign over everything I owned, or face prosecution for crimes I hadn't committed, but that they could probably make stick long enough to destroy me. What kind of criminal charges? I asked. Tax evasion, primarily. But there are also some questions about your consulting contracts. Some of your clients have been flagged for suspicious activities, and your association with them could be problematic. I knew my client list better than anyone, and there was nothing suspicious about any of them. But I also knew that in the right hands, innocent business relationships could be twisted into something sinister. Pierce was essentially telling me that they had the power to destroy my reputation and my freedom if I didn't cooperate. I see, I said, picking up one of the documents and pretending to study it. And if I sign these papers, all of these potential problems just disappear? Exactly, Ayla said, her voice warm with fake relief. We're trying to protect you, Corbin. Protect us. The audacity of it was breathtaking. She was sitting in our kitchen with her family lawyer, threatening to have me prosecuted for fabricated crimes, and she was framing it as protection, as if she was doing me a favor by stealing everything I'd worked for. Well, I said, setting the papers down and looking directly at Pierce, I appreciate you both looking out for me, but I think I'd like to get a second opinion before I sign anything this significant. Pierce's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. I wouldn't recommend that, Corbin. Time is of the essence here, and involving additional parties could complicate matters unnecessarily. What Pierce means, Ayla said, her hand landing on my shoulder with possessive familiarity, is that we need to handle this quietly, for everyone's sake. I looked at my wife's face, searching for any trace of the woman I'd married, any hint of genuine concern or affection. What I saw instead was impatience, calculation, and barely concealed contempt. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. You know what? I said, standing up and moving away from her touch. You're right. Time is of the essence. I walked to the kitchen counter, opened the drawer where we kept important documents, and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were copies of the evidence Soren and I had compiled, printed screenshots of text messages, transcripts of recorded conversations, financial records showing the money Ayla and Trent had been moving around. "Before I sign anything," I said, turning back to face them, "I think we should discuss some irregularities I've discovered in our own household." I placed the folder on the table and opened it, revealing the first page, a transcript of Ayla and Lana's conversation about my pathetic devotion and their plans for the extraction. The color drained from Ayla's face. Pierce leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in as he realized the game had changed. "What is this?" Ayla whispered. "Evidence," I said simply. "Evidence of adultery, conspiracy, extortion, and fraud. Evidence that's been properly collected, authenticated, and prepared for legal proceedings." Pierce was scanning the documents quickly, his professional composure cracking as he realized the scope of what I'd uncovered. "Corbin, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," I interrupted, "was thinking I wouldn't find out. Did you really believe I'd spent 20 years in security consulting without learning how to protect myself?" Ayla was staring at the papers like they were venomous snakes. "You've been spying on me?" "I've been protecting my home with a legally installed security system that you approved. What you and your friends chose to do and say in front of those cameras is your responsibility, not mine." The silence that followed was deafening. Pierce was clearly calculating his legal exposure, while Ayla looked like she was trying to figure out how much I actually knew. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, enjoying the reversal of power more than I probably should have. "You're going to take your fraudulent documents and leave my house. Then you're going to think very carefully about your next move, because every step you take from here on out is going to be documented and used against you." Pierce stood up, gathering his papers with shaking hands. "Corbin, perhaps we should all take some time to cool down and approach this more rationally." "I am being rational," I said. "Rational would be calling the police right now and having you both arrested for extortion. Instead, I'm giving you a chance to walk away and reconsider your strategy." Ayla finally found her voice. "You can't prove anything." I smiled at her, the same smile I'd given her the night I found the burner phone. "Try me." They left without another word, Pierce practically dragging Ayla out the door while she stared back at me with a mixture of rage and fear. I watched them drive away, then went back to my office and called Soren. "Phase 1 complete," I told him. "They know I'm on to them." "How did they take it?" "About as well as you'd expect." "What's our next move?" "Now we see how desperate they really are," Soren said. "My guess is they'll try to escalate before you can get your evidence to the authorities. Be careful, Corbin. Cornered animals do unpredictable things." I hung up the phone and looked out at my quiet suburban street. Soren was right. Things were about to get much worse before they got better. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life. The loyal husband was gone. What remained was something much more dangerous. Friday evening found me sitting in my car outside Chez Laurent, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, watching my wife and her lover enjoy what they thought was a private celebration. They'd chosen a table by the window, probably to show off for the other diners, which made my surveillance much easier than they'd intended. Trent Mallard was everything I'd expected from Ayla's text messages. Tall, silver-haired, and possessed of the kind of arrogant confidence that comes with inherited wealth and unearned authority. He wore his expensive suit like armor and gestured expansively while talking, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. Ayla hung on his every word, laughing at his jokes and touching his arm with the kind of intimate familiarity she hadn't shown me in years. She was wearing a new dress, red silk that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments, and jewelry I didn't recognize. Apparently Trent was a generous benefactor. My phone buzzed with a text from Soren. "Package delivered. Check your email." I opened my laptop and found a comprehensive dossier on Trent Mallard that made for fascinating reading. Regional director at Hartwell Marketing, divorced twice, with a pattern of relationships with subordinates that had cost his previous companies significant settlement money. He was also heavily leveraged financially, despite his appearance of wealth, and had been moving money through offshore accounts in ways that would interest the IRS. But the most interesting discovery was that Trent had been recording his encounters with Ayla. Hidden cameras in his downtown condo had captured hours of footage that revealed not just their physical relationship, but their detailed plans for my destruction. Soren had hacked Trent's personal cloud storage and found a treasure trove of evidence that would destroy them both. I closed the laptop and walked into the restaurant. Chez Laurent was the kind of place where reservations were made months in advance, and the waitstaff treated customers with the reverence usually reserved for royalty. I'd eaten here exactly once before, on our 5th wedding anniversary, when Ayla had insisted we needed to maintain appearances in front of her colleagues. Tonight, I was about to give her colleagues something to really talk about. I approached their table with the confidence of a man who held all the cards. Trent saw me first, his face shifting from confusion to alarm as he recognized me from the photos Ayla had undoubtedly shown him. "Corbin," Ayla said, her voice tight with panic. "What are you doing here?" "Having dinner," I said pleasantly, pulling out the empty chair at their table and sitting down uninvited. "I hope you don't mind if I join you." Trent's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh, there's been a misunderstanding, all right," I said, signaling the waiter for a menu. "But not the kind you think." The restaurant's acoustics were perfect for what I had planned. Our table was positioned so that conversations could be easily overheard by the surrounding diners, many of whom I recognized as Ayla's colleagues and social contacts. The Chicago business community was surprisingly small, and gossip traveled fast. "Trent," I said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "I have to thank you for taking such good care of my wife. The jewelry, the clothes, the private getaways. You've been very generous." Ayla kicked me under the table, but I ignored her. Trent was looking around nervously, clearly aware that people were starting to pay attention to our conversation. "I'm not sure what you're implying," he began. "I'm not implying anything," I said, pulling out my phone and opening the audio app Soren had prepared. "I'm being quite direct." I pressed play, and Ayla's voice filled the space around our table with crystal clarity. "The funny thing is, he actually thinks I respect him for it, for being the devoted husband, while I'm out there actually living my life." The reaction was immediate and devastating. Conversations at nearby tables stopped as people turned to stare. Ayla's face went white, while Trent looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. "Turn that off," Ayla hissed, but I was just getting started. The next clip was even better. Trent's voice discussing how they would clean out the tech nerd and disappear with my assets. His words carried clearly through the restaurant's dining room, and I could see people pulling out their phones to record the drama. "This is harassment," Trent said, starting to stand up. "Sit down," I said quietly, and something in my voice made him comply. "We're not finished." I looked around the restaurant, noting the familiar faces among the diners. There was Margaret Hartwell, the owner of Ayla's marketing firm. James Morrison, the client Ayla had supposedly been meeting with during her late nights. Several other business contacts who would spread this story throughout Chicago's professional community within hours. "You see," I continued, my voice carrying to every corner of the dining room, "my wife and her boss have been planning to frame me for financial crimes while they steal my assets and run away together. They've been documenting their affair, their theft, and their conspiracy in remarkable detail." I played another clip, this one featuring Ayla and Lana discussing how men like Corbin never see it coming, and how easy it would be to play the victim if I ever discovered their plans. The restaurant had gone completely quiet except for the sound of my phone playing back their own words. Ayla was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks, while Trent looked like he was having a heart attack. "The best part," I said, standing up and addressing the room like I was giving a presentation, "is that they recorded themselves. Hours and hours of footage showing exactly how they planned to destroy an innocent man's life for money. Margaret Hartwell had heard enough. She stood up from her table and walked over to ours, her face a mask of professional fury. "Trent," she said coldly, "I think we need to have a conversation. Monday morning, first thing." "Margaret, I can explain," Trent began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "No explanation necessary. I heard quite enough." She turned to Ayla with the kind of look that ends careers. "As for you, Miss Finlor, I believe your employment with Hartwell Marketing is terminated, effective immediately." The humiliation was complete. Ayla was sobbing openly now, her carefully constructed image destroyed in front of everyone who mattered in her professional life. Trent was frantically trying to salvage the situation, but the damage was done. Their conspiracy had been exposed in the most public way possible. I left money on the table for my untouched meal and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them to face the consequences of their choices. Behind me, I could hear the buzz of conversation as the other diners discussed what they'd witnessed. My phone rang as I reached my car. It was Soren. "Please tell me you didn't just do what I think you did," he said. "Depends on what you think I did." "Publicly humiliated them in front of half of Chicago's business community." "Then yes, that's exactly what I did." Soren laughed. "You realize they're going to come after you now, right? This was a declaration of war." "Good," I said, starting my car and pulling out of the parking lot. "I've been fighting a war I didn't know existed for months. At least now, it's out in the open." As I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: satisfaction. For too long, I'd been the victim of their manipulation and lies. Tonight, I'd taken control of the narrative. But Soren was right about one thing. This was just the beginning. Ayla and Trent wouldn't take their public humiliation lying down. They'd regroup, plan their counterattack, and try to destroy me before I could finish destroying them. I was counting on it. Saturday morning brought an unseasonably warm October day, the kind of weather that made you forget winter was coming. I was in my garage, organizing tools and pretending to work on home projects while actually monitoring the surveillance feeds from my laptop, when I saw Trent's Tesla pull into my driveway. The man himself emerged from the car like he owned the place, his expensive casual wear and designer sunglasses projecting the kind of confidence that only comes from a lifetime of getting your way. He strode up to my front door and rang the bell with the aggressive persistence of someone who wasn't used to being ignored. I let him wait. The security cameras showed him pacing on my porch, checking his watch and muttering to himself. After about 5 minutes, he started pounding on the door. "Corbin, I know you're in there. We need to talk." I finally opened the door, greeting him with the kind of mild surprise that suggested I hadn't been watching his every move since he'd pulled up. "Trent," I said pleasantly, "what brings you to my neighborhood?" "You know exactly why I'm here," he said, pushing past me into my house without invitation. "That stunt you pulled last night was completely out of line." "Was it?" I asked, closing the door behind him. "I thought it was rather restrained, actually." He spun around to face me, his carefully maintained composure cracking to reveal the entitled bully underneath. "You humiliated Ayla in front of her colleagues. You destroyed her career over a personal matter that should have been handled privately." "Adultery, theft, and conspiracy are hardly personal matters," I said. "And I didn't destroy her career. She did that herself when she decided to plan my destruction with her boss." "You're being dramatic," Trent said, but there was something desperate in his voice. "Ayla made a mistake, sure, but this vindictive campaign of yours is going too far." I studied his face, noting the stress lines around his eyes and the way his hands shook slightly when he thought I wasn't looking. The public humiliation at the restaurant had cost him more than just embarrassment. It had cost him his job security and his reputation in a business community where both were everything. "What do you want, Trent?" I want you to back off, he said, trying to project authority he no longer possessed. Drop this whole thing. Let Ayla go quietly, and we'll all move on with our lives. And in return, we don't press charges for harassment and stalking. We don't make an issue of your illegal surveillance activities. We let you keep your reputation intact. I almost laughed. Even now, with his world crumbling around him, he was still trying to threaten me, still trying to play the game from a position of power he'd already lost. That's an interesting offer, I said, but I think you're forgetting something important. What's that? I have evidence of your crimes. You have accusations and empty threats. His mask dropped completely then, revealing the rage and desperation he'd been trying to hide. You think you're so smart, don't you? The clever little tech guy who outmaneuvered the big bad executives. I don't think I'm smart, I said. I know I'm prepared. Well, here's something you weren't prepared for, he said, pulling out his phone. I've been documenting your harassment campaign, the restaurant incident, your illegal surveillance, your stalking behavior. I have enough evidence to have you arrested. He showed me his phone screen, which displayed what looked like a police report form, but I could see the metadata in the corner of the screen, and I knew it was just a template he'd downloaded from the internet. That's not a real police report, I said. It will be, as soon as I file it, along with a restraining order that will keep you away from Ayla permanently. I walked to my living room window and looked out at his Tesla, gleaming in the morning sunlight. It was a beautiful car, the kind of status symbol that announced to the world that its owner was successful, sophisticated, and environmentally conscious. Trent clearly loved that car more than he'd ever loved any person. You know what I find interesting about your car? I said. What? He asked, clearly confused by the change of subject. The security system, very sophisticated, cameras, motion sensors, GPS tracking. It's like a computer on wheels. So computers can be hacked? I pulled out my own phone and opened an app that Soren had installed for me. With a few taps, I accessed Trent's Tesla through a vulnerability in its wireless system that most people didn't even know existed. The car's horn started honking. The lights began flashing. The doors opened and closed repeatedly while the radio blasted at maximum volume. What the hell? Trent ran to the window, watching in horror as his prized possession had what appeared to be an electronic seizure in my driveway. Oops, I said. Looks like your car is having some technical difficulties. He ran outside, frantically trying to stop the chaos with his key fob, but the car's systems were completely under my control. Neighbors were starting to come out of their houses to see what was causing the commotion. I followed him outside, enjoying the show. You know, Trent, the thing about threatening someone in the cybersecurity business is that we tend to have skills you don't expect. The car finally stopped its electronic tantrum, but the damage to Trent's dignity was complete. Half the neighborhood was watching him stand helplessly beside his malfunctioning status symbol, looking like exactly what he was. A bully who'd picked on the wrong person. How did you... he began. Trade secret, I said. But here's something that isn't a secret. If you ever threaten me again, if you ever come to my house again, if you ever contact me again in any way, I'll make sure that little demonstration looks like a gentle warning. He stared at me with a mixture of fear and hatred, finally understanding that he was completely outmatched. The confident executive who'd walked up to my door was gone, replaced by a man who'd just learned that his comfortable world of privilege and power had very real limits. This isn't over, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Yes, it is, I replied. You just don't know it yet. He got into his car and drove away, but not before I noticed him checking his rearview mirror repeatedly, probably wondering what other surprises I might have in store for him. I went back inside and called Soren to tell him about the encounter. You hacked his Tesla? Soren asked, laughing. That's brilliant. Completely illegal, but brilliant. Sometimes you have to speak a language people understand, I said. Trent understands power and humiliation. Now he knows I can deliver both. What's your next move? I wait, I said. They're getting desperate, which means they're going to make mistakes. And when they do, I'll be ready. But as I hung up the phone, I realized that waiting might not be an option. Through my security cameras, I could see a familiar car parked at the end of my street. Ayla's BMW. She'd been watching the whole encounter with Trent, and the expression on her face suggested that she was planning something much more dangerous than her lover's amateur threats. The game was escalating, and I had the feeling that the next move would determine who won and who lost everything. Sunday evening arrived with the kind of autumn chill that made you want to stay inside and pretend the world beyond your windows didn't exist. I was in my office, reviewing the legal documents Soren and I had prepared for Monday's court filing, when the security system detected movement in my backyard. The cameras showed 3 figures moving through the shadows near my back fence: Ayla, Trent, and a third person I didn't immediately recognize. They were dressed in dark clothing and moving with the kind of careful stealth that suggested they weren't here for a friendly conversation. I activated the house's lockdown protocol, a security feature I'd installed but never expected to use. Steel shutters dropped over the windows, reinforced doors engaged their electronic locks, and the exterior lighting system blazed to life, turning my backyard into a stage where their every move would be recorded in high definition. The third person turned out to be Lana, Ayla's gossipy friend who'd helped plan my humiliation. She was carrying a crowbar and what looked like a can of spray paint, apparently ready to escalate from emotional warfare to actual property damage. My phone rang. It was Ayla. "Let us in, Corbin," she said without preamble. "We need to talk." "We can talk through the security system," I replied, activating the external speakers. "I'm comfortable where I am." "Don't be ridiculous. Turn off this fortress nonsense and open the door like a civilized person." Through the cameras, I could see her standing at my back door, trying to project confidence while Trent and Lana lurked behind her like amateur criminals. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd been planning to rob me blind was now literally trying to break into my house. "I don't think so," I said. "But please, continue with whatever you were planning. The cameras are recording everything." That stopped them cold. They'd clearly expected to catch me off guard, to intimidate me into submission through the threat of violence or property damage. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a spotlight, their criminal intent documented for posterity. "You can't hide in there forever," Trent called out, his voice carrying clearly through the audio pickups. "I'm not hiding," I replied through the speakers. "I'm watching, and recording, and preparing to call the police if you don't leave my property immediately." But instead of leaving, they did something I didn't expect. They sat down on my patio furniture and made themselves comfortable, as if they were planning to wait me out. "We know about your evidence," Ayla said, looking directly into one of the cameras. "We know you think you have enough to destroy us, but you're wrong." "Am I?" "Pierce found a way to discredit everything you've collected. Illegal surveillance, invasion of privacy, harassment. By the time we're done, you'll be the one facing criminal charges." I had to admit, that was a clever strategy. Attack the evidence rather than deny the crimes, and hope that procedural violations would overshadow substantive guilt. It might have worked too if I hadn't been planning for exactly this scenario. "That's an interesting theory," I said, "but there's one thing you haven't considered." "What's that?" I activated the final surprise I'd been saving for this moment, the neighborhood-wide security network that Soren and I had been building for the past month. Cameras and audio pickups that I'd installed with my neighbor's permission, creating a comprehensive surveillance web that covered every street, every yard, and every approach to my house. The screens in my office lit up with feeds from a dozen different angles, showing not just my 3 uninvited guests, but also the police cars that were already surrounding my property. I'd called them the moment I detected the intrusion, and they'd been moving into position while Ayla made her threats. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced through the speakers, "you're surrounded." The look of panic on their faces was priceless. They spun around, seeing the police officers emerging from behind trees, around corners, and through neighbors' yards. They'd walked into a trap so complete that escape was impossible. "Corbin Finlor," came a voice through a police megaphone. "This is Sergeant Martinez with the Chicago PD. Please deactivate your security system and come outside." I complied, shutting down the lockdown protocol and walking out my front door with my hands visible and a smile on my face. The scene in my backyard was everything I'd hoped for. Ayla, Trent, and Lana in handcuffs, while officers collected the crowbar and spray paint as evidence. "Mr. Finlor," Sergeant Martinez said, "we received your call about attempted breaking and entering. Can you walk us through what happened?" I provided a calm, detailed account of the evening's events, supported by high-definition video and crystal-clear audio recordings. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 people had come onto my property with tools for vandalism and burglary, had threatened me when I refused them entry, and had attempted to intimidate me into dropping legitimate legal proceedings against them. "We'll need copies of all your surveillance footage," the sergeant said. "Of course. I've already prepared a complete package for you." As the police loaded my wife and her conspirators into separate patrol cars, Ayla caught my eye through the window. The hatred in her expression was pure and absolute, but there was something else there too. The dawning realization that she'd lost everything. Her career was gone. Her reputation was destroyed. Her lover was facing criminal charges alongside her. And her husband, the loyal, devoted, predictable man she'd taken for granted, had outmaneuvered her at every turn. "You think you've won," she mouthed through the glass. I walked over to the patrol car and leaned down to the window level, speaking quietly so only she could hear. "I don't think I've won," I said. "I know I have." The car pulled away, taking her out of my life forever. I stood in my driveway, surrounded by the flashing lights of police vehicles and the curious stares of my neighbors, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete and total satisfaction. My phone buzzed with a text from Soren. "Saw the news feeds. Nicely done." I looked around at the scene, the police cars, the evidence bags, the neighbors recording everything with their phones. By tomorrow, the story would be all over social media and the local news. The woman who'd tried to frame her husband for financial crimes had been arrested for attempted burglary. The executive who'd planned to steal another man's assets was facing criminal charges of his own. The loyal husband everyone had underestimated had turned out to be the most dangerous player in the game. I walked back into my house, closed the door, and poured myself a drink. Outside, the police were finishing their investigation, and the neighbors were slowly returning to their homes. The street would be quiet again soon, but the story would live forever in the digital archives I'd created. Tomorrow, I would file for divorce with evidence so comprehensive that Ayla's lawyers would have no choice but to accept whatever terms I offered. I would testify at her criminal trial, watching from the witness stand as she faced the consequences of her choices. I would rebuild my life on the foundation of truth rather than lies. But tonight, I simply sat in my chair and smiled, knowing that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people destroy themselves while you watch. The surveillance smile, as I'd come to think of it. The expression of a man who'd learned that loyalty might be rare, but intelligence combined with patience was rarer still, and infinitely more powerful.